As we began giving examples of food laws, we cannot ignore the United States and the European Union. Comparisons of food laws and policies in the United States and the European Union are of local, international, and global interest. Developing nations view them as countries with knowledge, advanced standards, and beneficial expertise, as they always operate cautiously and possess risk assessments, fundamentals, and risk management knowledge. Their policies and decisions influence the legislative structure of Codex because their policies provide a favorable climate and good scientific discussions for exploring updates within Codex. It is important to note that there is a debate on the scene. Which is better, U.S. regulations or EU regulations? There are always said to be some differences, and we will present some differences that should be given attention and caution. For example, the European Union is said to operate more cautiously than the United States, always having risks in certain areas such as hormones in meat, genetically modified organisms, GMOs, chemicals, and climate change. On the other hand, the United States exercises caution in issues like air pollution, mad cow disease, or tobacco. Certainly there is a difference, and let's clarify this difference. I want to start with the risk assessment topic. The bodies that manage risk analysis processes in the United States and the European Union naturally differ. In the United States, there are three different bodies. The United States Food and Drug Administration, which is a federal agency of the Department of Health and Human Services, FDA, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, and the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA. These three bodies have some overlap as they assess and manage risks and make decisions. It is better to have a single organization to manage all of this. Why this is important, let me clarify by example. Please note that the USDA regulates meat, poultry, eggs, and catfish, while the FDA regulates other products. The example states that if you have a pizza with cheese and pepperoni, the USDA will classify it under pepperoni, meat, and regulate it under continuous inspection. However, if you remove the pepperoni, the pizza with cheese alone will be regulated by the FDA, and inspections will occur once every 5 years. Imagine if an infant formula is inspected every 5 years. Of course, this is a risky procedure. In doing so, we are calling for regulatory reform and advocating for the existence of a single entity to conduct risk assessment processes. In the European Union, the European Food Safety Authority, which is an agency of the European Union that provides independent scientific advice and communicates on existing and emerging risks associated with the food chain, is responsible for conducting risk assessments, but risk management is done by the European Commission. So we are facing a situation similar to the United States, where certain policies require refinement and improvement. Let me tell you about some examples that illustrate the differences in regulations between the European Union and the United States, and also share some important observations. Genetically modified organisms, GMOs, are one area where the European Union differs significantly from the United States. In the EU, GMOs have strict regulations and specific limits. There is always a policy of zero tolerance for unauthorized genetically modified organisms, and genetically modified products with more than 0.9% must be labeled and identified. There are more regulations concerning genetically modified crops. In the United States, there are practically unavoidable trace amounts of genetic modification, called rDNA or BE in the U.S., and around 5% allowance is allocated to products manufactured using genetic engineering. The second example I want to tell you about is bovine somatotropin or growth hormone, RBST, which is used to increase milk production in cows. This hormone was approved in the United States in 1993 but is banned in the European Union. There is a difference in regulations between the European Union and the United States. However, be careful not to look at things superficially because the issue is more complex than you might think. If you delve into the details, take a step back, and look at the overall picture, you will notice some differences, especially in application, enforcement, and implementation. We always say that the law and what is written differ from what is applied in reality, because sometimes the law is good, but there is no practical application. So, There are differences between the texts of the law and the law in actual practice, making it more complex than it seems. The second thing, when the matter concerns the market and weak law enforcement, some products need registration or pre-market approval before being introduced to the markets, which is a good step for the business operator to check the product before being introduced to the markets. However, some other products don't require registration, which puts the burden on governments to discover problems through sampling and inspection. Because if the food business operator does not perform their compliance task well and does not consider the specifications, the government will take on this task. Regardless of the strength of the government's analysis, inspection, and sampling, there will certainly be things that cannot be controlled. This puts a heavy burden on governments. It is very important to know that there is a burden on governments in some applications of the law or some policies for applying standards and technical regulations. These were some comparisons between the European Union and the United States, and it was important for you to know these points because it is also important to understand. I will emphasize again that the issue is more complex than it appears. We will not say which is better than the other because when you delve into it, you may find that the law is strict. When you delve deeper and see the actual application, you will find that the application in some areas is flexible, and in others there is no application of the law. It is important to look at the big picture and understand the subject from the inside and outside, including all the details.